It's Tuesday, August 19th, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast, the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock. With me this week is, as ever, Stephen Doss.
Good evening.
On tonight's episode, we are going to be dealing with the situation in Ferguson. It has certainly been dominating the U.S. news cycle for literally the past 10 days, and shows no sign of stopping. So this is a kind of week where we are going to talk about the news. So as most people who have turned on a television, looked at a newspaper, or seen Twitter in the past 10 days will know, on August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed by Darren Wilson. Michael Brown was an unarmed person. Darren Wilson was an armed police officer. Michael Brown, independent autopsies have shown that Michael Brown was shot 6 times, 4 times in the arm, twice in the head, and he died essentially immediately. He was 18 years old. He would have started college this week or next, and so he's dead, and he was killed by an armed police officer. This has led to a massive outpouring of protests in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, where this took place, where most of the police force is white and most of the residents are African American. And this has been a story of racial tensions blown up, of calls for justice, of protests also being used for looting, and also the police using this as a chance to roll out military-level hardware in a civilian situation. A lot of the news reports I read and see compare it to Bagram or places in Iraq, whereas this is literally in the middle of America. And so there's a lot of things swirling around about this story that we're going to talk about, but I think we have to open this with a caveat. We do this from time to time, and possibly not enough. We are 2 white dudes.
Yes, we are.
Almost clear in my color. It's very white. And so while academically, intellectually, I can talk about race in America, I think we both have certainly done academic study into this. Like, we're not totally uninformed. We are not ourselves African American.
Our study has been purely academic. We can never,
know
what it's like.
We can do the age old. Well, I have black friends, but like, fundamentally, this is not our lived. Racism in America is not our lived experience.
Right.
And so any discussion we have of this needs to have that caveat in front of it. We're 2 white dudes. And I think it's important to talk about it, and I think it's important for all Americans, all people, to talk about these issues and to have real conversation around it. But fundamentally still, we are 2 white dudes talking about race. So there's a certain level of weirdness to that
yes.
it just is. And I want to make sure that's out there, that it's not like we don't know, that there's some weirdness to this, as 2 white dudes talking about race. So Stephen, I want to get kind of your first, kind of what aspect of this story resonates the most with you. Not to ask a difficult question.
I mean, just dumb it down for me. I mean, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
I think the biggest thing for me is just that resonates the most is just that for lack of a better word, it seems like there's this jump to kill mentality now in police. And I know, again, it's not all cops. It's not most police officers.
All right, who not? Yeah, sure.
I mean, we can safely assume that. It's just there's this huge mentality ever since terrorism struck the United States, 9/11, all that stuff, when we decided that we needed to give police officers all this
military hardware.
Exactly, for military hardware.
And training. And it actually starts not with the war on terror, but it starts with the war on drugs.
That's true, yes.
Looking at this a little bit, the funding for all of the military hardware to the police started with the war on drugs. It escalated drastically with the war on terror.
Right.
Certainly, it's something like $4 billion in military hardware has been transferred from the Department of Defense to police departments around the United States. And that is a worrying sign. You have police in military gear running around with assault rifles pointing them at unarmed civilians in Ferguson.
And the big thing is that, like almost 2 decades ago, we had this mentality of a police officer in a blue shirt, blue pants with a badge walking around, like basically being, Mr. Police Officer. And now every time we see a police officer on the news, even if it's someone like just presenting, they're in full-on body armor and
well, it's interesting. The way the Department of Defense funding works is that if you have to use these things within the first year of receiving them. Mm-hmm. And so this military hardware is being used in greater and greater variety of applications. So now a lot of times SWAT tactics, special weapons and tactics, are being deployed for search warrants on drug offenses.
Yeah.
And most arrests relating to drug offenses are being done with this military hardware. And so you have this, police are turning more and more into not just kind of law officers, but essentially a paramilitary in each city. John Oliver on Last Week Tonight did a piece on this, piece on police militarization, and right near me here in Georgia, there's a police department with a tank, and they have a video set to really like death metal of them driving around this tank in a training exercise. A tank. When? What? We have a National Guard, which has now also been deployed.
Is now in Ferguson, Missouri now.
But I thought to me, if you need a tank, just call the National Guard. That's what they're there for. A tank, it's worrying partly because it changes the mentality. It's not just that these things are out there. To a certain extent, if there ever was an invasion or a terrible event, I would be thankful that there are some things that can protect me. But the fact that they're into the hands of the police force, and that sort of implies that they're going to use them.
Exactly.
It's not like these things are just going to sit on the shelf. In fact, the rules are such that they have to use them. And so they do. And so you see the police in Ferguson rolling around in military armored vehicles with military weapons dressed like the military.
And it's just, that's not what the police are meant to do. They're meant to protect and serve, is the age-old adage. And who is being protected and who is being served with tanks and body armor? You're almost walking into a situation and you're going to make it worse just by your being there because you've got all these weapons.
Well, I think one of the stories here with the response and the initial incident is this weird escalation of force.
Yeah.
So how Michael Brown got shot is a subject of debate, right?
Yes.
Witnesses conflict, to say the least.
Yes.
But so there are some witnesses that say, he was raising his hands and saying he wasn't armed. There are some witnesses that said he, including the officer, that he wrestled with the officer for the gun and tried to, like, push him back in his cop car and then charged him. And while Michael Brown was charging Darren Wilson, that's when Darren Wilson essentially unloaded his entire clip into, of that there is very little dispute that he unloaded almost his entire clip into Michael Brown. But that is,
now we're just trying to figure out, was it out of fear because he was getting manhandled? Was it out of, he just felt like shooting at someone running away or with his hands up?
So, and it looks, based on the autopsy, it looks like Michael Brown was coming towards Darren Wilson when he was shot.
With his head down, I think.
Head kind of down, so you have an entrance wound on the front and then the exit wounds on the back, which would indicate that, he was coming towards him.
Yes.
So let's take the most pessimistic scenario. Let's take this. I don't know. I wasn't there. This is the problem with eyewitness testimony, is everyone has a vested interest in this.
Exactly.
So there's no security cam footage. But let's, for the sake of argument, take the worst possible scenario from my perspective, and that is that Michael Brown was an aggressor in this situation. So let's assume, I don't know. I really don't know. But let's, for the sake of argument, you have to start somewhere. So let's assume that's what's happening. Because obviously if Michael Brown isn't the aggressor in this situation, there was no reason to use deadly force.
Right.
And I think that goes without saying. But let's analyze this from the most pessimistic point of view. So Michael Brown may have been wrestling for the gun and then was charging the officer. The officer shot him 6 times. 4 times in the arm and twice in the head. There are 2 things here. One, why did he escalate to a kill shot?
Yeah.
That, to me, like, I'm not in the situation, that's a judgment call thing, right? But we train police, theoretically, in these judgment calls. And there are ways to stop an unarmed assailant that is not shoot in the arm, which is an incredibly ineffective way to stop a person from doing anything, to shoot them in the head. Right? So there could have been shots to the lower, if he really thought that he was in risk of being killed by Michael Brown, which again, totally debatable. I don't know.
Debate.
But let's assume that that's what he felt. Let's give him, I'm not sure how much I really want to extend Darren Wilson in terms of the benefit of the doubt, but let's extend it that far.
And we have to, honestly, at this point, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, and ultimately, what it may come down to is we'll never know.
We'll never
know. That's
know.
a horrible thing. But there is, I would hope that police are trained in the, in a way to non-lethal force as much as possible.
Because so we have some interesting laws in this country baked into our founding document that is, punishment fitting the crime, no cruel and unusual punishment. So let's assume that Michael Brown was essentially threatening the life of an officer. Let's assume that. I don't know.
We don't know?
We don't know. But again, let's assume that that's what was happening. Even in that case, an unarmed assailant, and you shot him in the head, right? There isn't, tasing. You could have, most police now carry some sort of non-lethal weapon, such as mace or a taser. You could have tased him. You could have maced him. You could have shot him in his lower extremities, which, again, still bad. You are still shooting at an unarmed assailant.
Yeah.
But at least then he lives, right? And that, and maybe his life is affected by what may have been a bad decision, what may have not. Again, we don't know. But I still really deeply question, even if Michael Brown was doing something wrong, which the facts do not necessarily establish, that lethal force was the logical answer in that situation. In fact, I would think, as the ethics of police, lethal force against anybody who isn't actively shooting at you, or let me rephrase that, lethal force in general as a police force seems wildly inadvisable given the wide variety of options.
Yeah.
If this is someone with an assault, like, there are possibly situations, and from my police officer friends, no one likes drawing their weapon. No one likes having to go through that, right?
Right.
But even still, an unarmed assailant, assuming he was the aggressor in the situation, I still don't think, under any ethical framework, that lethal force was authorized.
But excuse me. But unfortunately, you also have this fear aspect that comes from it.
Sure.
If, again, most pessimistic view that the officer was being assailed against.
Sure.
If that is the case, and again, we don't know the case, we weren't there. In all honesty, I don't think that's the case, but that's just my personal opinion. Because I think there's this fear aspect.
But again,
you're having someone come against you. They try to take your gun, and then they back away, and then they try to ram you. I don't know how I would react, but some part of me says maybe that he reacted in a way that he's like, oh, no, this larger African-American man is coming at me, and I know what that means. That means he's going to try to kill me. I got to get him first.
Yes, but you're still in this scenario. You are still a trained law enforcement officer that we have issued a badge and a gun, saying that they are the people who are going to make the right decisions. The theory behind government in a modern world is that a government holds the monopoly on force. That we as citizens grant the government the monopoly on force,
saying we know that you will do the right thing with this. We
trust you to enforce the laws with force when necessary. Not to react like an Old West gunfight or an action movie.
Yeah.
Even if we spend our tax dollars to train officers in exactly this kind of decision-making framework. Even if fear is involved, because of course fear is involved, and even to me, I question even the use of a gun, but let's say that a gun comes into play because of fear. When, in that framework, do you aim for the head? When? That makes no sense!
No, and
under any circumstance for an unarmed assailant. I even argue, as a police force, anytime you're aiming for the head, that is not a place you should be.
That is the wrong thing to do.
Because you have essentially acted as judge and jury and issued a death penalty sentence when you aim for the head. Not only have you inflicted a cruel and unusual punishment, you've entirely taken the law into your hands. This is not the Old West. This is the United States of America in the 21st century, and at no point do you aim for the head as a police officer.
No.
Unless it is absolutely necessary. There are possible.
It's the last resort.
It's the last resort.
No other option available anywhere.
If he had time to get 6 shots off, I feel like there was another option. Again, not in the situation. But an 18-year-old kid is dead.
Yeah.
And we'll never know the true facts. But we do know that cop had time to empty 6 shots into this kid. 6 shots!
Yeah.
First of all, you got to question how his dedication to his training, I guess, if, who knows. But 6 shots, and the kid's dead because of 2 headshots.
Yeah.
And so, kind of moving on from that aspect, which is something I'm, by the way, remarkably stuck on. There's been a lot of interesting discussion around a lot of times when crimes and situations like this happen, we work really hard to go, oh no, he was one of the good ones, and that's why he doesn't deserve to die.
Yep.
Let's be clear. Even if he wasn't one of the good ones, he didn't deserve to die.
Right.
Even if he hadn't been a college-bound kid, even if he hadn't been a nice guy, even if he had been a gang member, at no point does that mean they deserve to die.
Right.
So while it is wonderful that he was whatever one of the this is a quote I've seen, not my own language. One of the good ones. He may have made some bad decisions in the lead up to this or not. Again, entirely unclear. No source is neutral on this. We don't know.
Especially a source using the term "one of the good ones."
One of the good ones.
That's just that implies that everyone else that may look similar is one of the bad ones.
Right. So, all lives, certainly from a faith perspective,
yes,
all lives are valuable. We all fall short of the glory of God.
Yep.
And all lives are valuable.
Let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Right.
Basically, if you ain't perfect, you ain't the decider of anything.
You ain't the decider of anything. And so, to look at this as, I mean, it's a tremendous tragedy whether he was a gang member and a drug dealer or a college-bound kid who may or may not have made a bad decision. In all of anything in that range, if he is a human life, which he was, that life has value.
Yeah.
Certainly from a faith perspective, and I argue from a secular moral perspective, though that life has a value regardless of if he was a good or bad person. And it's wonderful that his is a life to be celebrated. I want to take away from. He sounds like a really he was a really interesting kid. But even if he hadn't been those things, his life is valuable.
Yeah.
And we can't sit here and say it would have been okay had he been a gang member.
Yeah.
No, it's still not okay. Now, maybe he would, if he had been a hardened criminal, maybe there would needed to be a legal process to help him become rehabilitated. Not that our legal system's real good at that, but theoretically,
that's what it's meant
could
to
happen.
Do.
No, we privatized the prisons, so it's really actually financial incentive just to keep people in jail.
Exactly.
It's not, that. All that being as it may, that whatever that is, wherever he is on that spectrum of good or bad person, that life has meaning and that life has value, and we can't just write it off. It's come out that he may or may not have robbed a convenience store, or he may or may not have consumed marijuana. None of those things justify his death. None of those things mean that his life somehow became less valuable.
Right.
We are all children of God. We are also all sinners. And theologically speaking, there is not a hierarchy of sin.
No, there's not.
No one deserves to be shot 6 times when not carrying a weapon themselves.
Right.
No one.
No one deserves to be shot 6 times, period.
Right. Right. And certainly shot 6 times and then killed as a result.
Yes.
Regardless of where he falls on a spectrum of good or bad, his life is valuable.
Yeah.
All lives are valuable.
Exactly.
So, Steven, is there anything else about this story that strikes you?
Yes. I'm not going to name names.
Okay. Yep.
But I have been seeing a lot of people posting pictures of them with their hands up in solidarity.
Sure. Yeah. There's a wonderful shot of Howard, of freshman orientation at Howard University, and it's just it looks like 1,000 young African Americans around the same age as Michael Brown all doing it. It was a wonderfully powerful image.
Unfortunately, though, some of those pictures are of people who are like us, who are faithful and who are Caucasian, and they have their hands up, but they're smiling.
Yeah.
And that's a great mentality to have, to say, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's why we're doing this show, right?
Yeah. There's also something sort of condescending about, we have our hands up, but we're smiling about it.
Right, or at
As
least,
in, this is a photo op for us. Look at us. Aren't we terrific?
It's oddly disconnected.
It's very disconnected. And it just doesn't. It irks me.
I mean, I clearly I believe that Caucasian Americans are perfectly capable of standing in solidarity on this issue, and I think we need to
definitely.
That this can't be just a African American problem. A man died. A valuable life was taken. Like,
yeah,
red or yellow, like a precious child of God is no longer with us.
Exactly.
Because of a series of situations and institutional structures that are deeply flawed.
Exactly.
And we all need to be talking about this, and we all need to find our own way to stand in solidarity. But I think that feels kind of like our discussion on slacktivism a few months back. That there's real solidarity, and then there's this is blowing up on social media, I want to do a thing.
I need to be a part of it. Here I go. Take a picture, guys. Yay.
And like there are people of a variety of backgrounds participating in the non-violent aspects of the protest in Ferguson. Like there's a lot of cool work that's being done. A lot of the journalists of a variety of backgrounds that are there on the front lines, reporting it on Twitter and through the traditional media. There's a lot of things happening that I think are very positive in regards to standing in solidarity with the community of Ferguson, and to stand up to police militarization and to stand up against racism and all of the things that have come into play here. That being said, smiling, oh, fun picture, yeah.
That's just, yeah. And so I just want us to start thinking about the way we do react to this kind of things, where we are, thinking one thing, and then it's denotation and connotation.
Sure.
The denotation behind it is perfectly wonderful. Stand in solidarity.
Yeah.
We want justice, whatever that means. We don't want anyone to ever have to go through this situation ever again. And we want the structures that brought about this situation to be changed for the better.
Right. Exactly.
That's great. Connotation is you're smiling at a real hurt.
Again, a man is dead.
A man is dead.
A community is undergoing extreme turmoil.
Right.
This is not a time for happy, silly protests. Yeah. I have similar thoughts on the ice bucket challenge for ALS that's been going around the news. That a lot of the, kind of the high-profile people that have done the ice bucket challenge have also donated. And the ALS Association has seen a huge spike in donations, so that's wonderful. But anytime, like, a disease becomes a meme, you go, this is I know it's kind of funny and silly to dump a bucket of ice on your head, but, guys, this is a real thing.
Yeah. People die of this disease.
Right.
There's no cure. And I'm glad that, donations are going in for research.
They're going way up.
Yeah.
The ALS Association has been really pleased with this fundraiser. And so, there's some positive aspects to it. But again, I think it comes back to that attitude of how are you approaching your activism?
Exactly.
Is it, smiling, oh, I just dumped a bucket of ice on my head? Or are you really talking about, how that simulates symptoms and what that felt like and how that helps you connect to someone who is suffering with ALS and how that can serve for you as an inspiration that no one should have to suffer from this disease. It's the method matters, right?
Yes.
How you do this activism thing matters. And the internet makes this really easy where we can stand in solidarity with anything and make that public. But how you need to really think about how you do it, or you come off as, shall we say, tone deaf.
Yeah.
So, on that note, again, we should probably get out of here. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback or want to share your own thoughts on activism, slacktivism, thoughts on Ferguson, something we missed, something you disagree with, please send in. Our email is synboldly at synboldly at nfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at synboldly on Twitter. and go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and end fear by signing your name. Good night.